On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country, to obey the Scout Law, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. The Scout Law. A Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent.
Hey, my name is Steve Hinton, and I serve as a pastor and author.
I'm your co-host, Matthias. I serve as a personal trainer and a volunteer at my local church.
We want to welcome you to The Man Identity, a podcast that is dedicated to calling up young men into purposeful manhood, which is ultimately found in Jesus Christ and being made in the image of God.
In a culture that is often deliberately set against young men, we're here to intentionally build hope, clarity, and strength into the hearts of these men who are searching for purpose. Together, we will face tough issues head on, throw down some weekly challenges, and have some fun along the way.
Because solid manhood is not automatic, but rather it's a choice. We're here to walk alongside you and encourage you to live out your authentic identity in being made in the image of God for a purpose larger than you have ever imagined.
So join us now for another episode of The Man Identity. Steve, I had never heard the Boy Scout oath. I've never been a Boy Scout. This entire interview was all new information to me. So, yeah, I've never heard of any of that before.
It's a cultural thing to think about today, where there are more and more young men who don't know about the Boy Scouts compared to 50, 60 years ago, where it was a bigger part of the American culture. And I believe it's an important episode. I'm not pushing Boy Scouts. I don't think that's the application today, but there are things that we can learn from it. But the first thing I want to do is I just want to remind our audience that the challenges that we give, these are things that we are wanting to do ourselves. And going back to episode number 2, we had Steve Spicer, the co-founder and president of Mark Men for Christ, and we had a deliberate challenge at the end of that episode. Matthias, what was that challenge and what did you do about it?
That was attending a phase 1 Mark Men for Christ retreat, whatever the right word is. And as you can tell, I followed up on that challenge.
So for our listening audience or podcast, he's got the hat. You got the hat, don't you?
I got the hat on right now, the Mark Men for Christ hat. We got to, at the end, we were looking at all the Mark Men for Christ gear, and I always, this is the same brand of hat that I wear almost every day for work, same size and everything, so I had to get me one of these. So I really like it. I wear it every day, so I've gotten to show my clients. They're wondering what that is. They see, Christ in big, bold words, so they always ask about it. Yeah.
What was one lesson that you got out of that weekend, Matthias?
Oh man. Okay. One lesson. There's so many things that I really got out of that weekend. One is it's one thing to know where your faults are, where your challenges lie, where you need to be challenged as a man, and your weaknesses. It's another to really experience and know how to find that healing in Christ. And it's uncomfortable, but in the best way. I think just coming out with knowing how to find healing in Jesus through these issues and putting your pride down, and it's hard to really describe without getting into a whole lot. But man, it was a wonderful weekend. And if you're looking for healing, which I think most people are, if you're a man, go to one of these phase 1s. Like we talked about in that second episode, Steve Spicer. It's pay what you can, pray about it, and pay what you can.
Yeah.
So I would highly encourage every one of you men to go. I think you'll definitely get something out of it.
It was a good weekend. It was a solid weekend. I was privileged to help staff that weekend. For me, going back to episode 1, the challenge was to find an older man and just ask for some advice very humbly. Just sit there and be receptive and listen. And I think about my own life, and the thing about this past year is that 2 of my mentors have died, and one of those, a guy by the name of Larry Kinnaman, over in England, and it was actually a shock to me. About a week and a half ago, he had a stroke. He was 74, had a stroke, and he just didn't recover. And the point being, guys, is that you don't know. For us, we don't know how long we have The Bible says it's appointed unto men once to die and then the judgment. But also, we might be thinking, well, I'll get around to it. Hey, I've got this godly man in my church, or hey, maybe I do have a relationship with my father, a good relationship, or whoever it might be. And sometimes there's this idea of, well, I'll wait. I'll get around to that question. I'll get around to following up on that advice. I'll get around to it. And the truth of the matter is, we just don't know. So,
right.
Going back to that challenge of we want to be stronger men, one of the ways we can become stronger men is getting into the lives of older men we respect, getting eyeball to eyeball, listening to them, putting into practice things that they put into our lives. So I just wanted to give our audience, listening and viewing audience, a review on that. Just want you to know that Matthias and I take these challenges ourselves, that we want to come back to that.
Got to practice what you preach.
Yeah, there we are.
Well, this interview was really good. I learned a lot, actually, because like I said, I don't know anything about Boy Scouts. And you'll have to excuse me, audience, if I'm very nasally. I'm a little sick today, so bear with me here. Bear with my voice here. We'll get to the good stuff here in a second. But yeah, so I learned a good amount because I had cousins and things that were actually Eagle Scouts. Like they said in the interview, they are Eagle Scouts. But I never knew anything about what it encompassed, what they did, what went on. So it was really cool to just hear all the different aspects, like the 12 values of Boy Scouts, or what it used to be. I know you've talked about how it's just the culture has shifted it. But yeah, so it was a really good interview. Very solid men.
Well, so I'm calling this episode "The Rise and Fall of the Boy Scouts of America," and then what young men still need to know today. And scouting actually began in England in 1908. Its founder was a Lord Baden-Powell, who was a who was a hero in one of the Boer Wars in South Africa. And in 1908, he just looked at the number of young men in his country who were growing up without purpose, growing up without character. And oh my goodness, that kind of sounds like our culture today.
Right.
And he was a man who was a believer. His father was a Protestant pastor as well as a professor at Oxford. So Baden-Powell knew God. Baden-Powell said that his two most favored books were A, the Bible, and B, just creation, nature being out in creation. And he took principles from his life in the military, and he put those together. And one of the best ways you can find out about something is not reading about them, but reading their actual quotes. And Baden-Powell even referred to Boy Scouts as simply being applied Christianity. So he was a man who did believe in God. And I love this quote that he said, which I kind of get a chuckle at it, but he made this observation that one of the aims of Boy Scouts is to revive among us, if possible, some of the rules of the knights of old. And I thought, I just love that. So it was very purposeful to help boys become men. And to begin with, it's interesting, he never used the term teenager. Teenager is actually a relatively new term the past 50, 60 years or whatever, because up until then, Matthias, you were one or the other. You were either a boy or a man. And it was, how do I become a man? The goal is not, I want to become a teenager, but I want to become a man. So Boy Scouts was formed in England. Boy Scouts came over to America in 1911. And we could think about Boy Scouting in America, and there are a lot of famous Eagle Scouts. Immediately, Neil Armstrong comes to mind. Neil Armstrong, the first man who walked on the moon. Jim Lovell, the main pilot, NASA pilot in Apollo 13. George H. Bush, a number of presidents, a number of athletes, a number of men in the military were all Eagle Scouts. And there are also a lot of men who were part of scouting but never got that top rank, even in athletics. I'm not a huge basketball fan. But Michael Jordan, many people don't know this. Michael Jordan was in Boy Scouts. Harrison Ford was in Boy Scouts. And scouting really permeated or had a big place in the American culture. And its heyday would have been in the early 70s, Matthias, when at the time, 1970, I think specifically, they had close to 5 million boys registered. Today, that's about that's only about a million. So you're going from, almost 5 million to a million. And getting into the latter half of the 20th century, there was a cultural shift. Part of it just had to be an absence of the rigor, the expectations. The prior expectation was, this is tough, but you can do this. We're going to work together. We're going to be men. We're going to accomplish this. And a lot of that began to slide. But the real shift came in the early 2000s, when the scouting model kind of gave way to the business model and the wokeness. And I believe it was 2014, openly gay boys and gay scout leaders were allowed in. And then it just crashed in 2018 when girls were allowed in. And I made the point in our very first episode that the Girl Scouts still exist as a girl-centric group. Boy Scouts aren't that way anymore. Matter of fact, you cannot find Boy Scouts of America online. It all goes to Scouting America. That they completely ripped that out. And there's a gentleman who writes a blog called Simple Men, and I'm looking forward to a future episode where you and I get to discuss some of his blog posts.
Oh yeah.
But he even made the similar observation that you look at our culture today, that the spheres of influence that are just men-centric, boy-centric, so many of those are leaving, where a guy can just be with guys. Yeah. And there's nothing chauvinistic about it, but there are times when girls just need to be girls.
Right. There's times when guys need to be with guys. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the ways we become men. And I got 4 men together to do this interview. Now, all 4 of us are from the same troop. And Matthias, my personal story is that Boy Scouts was a huge piece in my life. A lot of times people think about Boy Scouts and a dozen boys, maybe 15, maybe 20, and then like 1 or 2 men who are, they're doing it because nobody else will. But in God's providence, I was able to be part of a very, very big scout troop. And when we roll the clip here for the interview, I talked to the first man. His name's Eric Wolfram. Eric is an attorney in Amarillo, Texas. Eric is an Eagle Scout. Eric was also senior patrol leader when he was a boy, and then he was scoutmaster. So when I came into the troop, and you have to be 11, I came into the troop, and there was a guy named Jack Bryant who was the scoutmaster at the time, and he's referenced a couple of times in the interview. I think about the interview. I had to cut out so much stuff, not because it was bad. It's like, oh my goodness, this is too fun, too much, and it reminded me of, in particular, there's a podcast that I like called "The Rest Is History." And 2 British guys, and they're always talking about, and if you want more content, subscribe, and then you can get the full interview.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, if we had subscribers today,
some kind of Patreon, it's just have the full unedited interviews.
Yeah, because there was a lot there. But here's what I asked them to do. I kick things off, and I just asked Eric Wolfram to talk about how Troop 80 formed, because it was very, very different. And then we have a guy named Rodney Scott. Rodney Scott was the senior patrol leader when I joined the troop. And so in a Boy Scout troop, you have patrols, and then 2 patrols make a squad, and then however many squads that makes the troop. So you're going to have a patrol leader, you're going to have an assistant patrol leader, then you're going to have an assistant senior patrol leader, then you're going to have the senior patrol leader who is the boy who just kind of runs the show. So there's this leadership, all these leadership lessons you can learn in scouting today that unless you join the ROTC in your school, something like that, there's just not a lot of opportunities. But Eric Wolfram, Rodney Scott, who was a senior patrol leader when I joined the troop, and then a guy named Tony McCullum, who was the senior patrol leader the year before I became the senior patrol leader. And what I asked them to do is, I asked them to take the 12 points of the Scout Law and just say, okay, here, point number 1 is trustworthy. What does that mean? And again, part of the point is these are things that really reflect the character of God. And these are characters that if we're going to be men, not boys, but men, we have to look at the character of God, and we have to work to reproduce these characters in our own lives. So that was the idea, and they gave some good answers. And I'm just praying that this will be an encouragement and a challenge to the young men to say, okay, you may never be a Boy Scout. And, there are, some good scout troops out today, but there are a lot that are just not good. And the program itself is not what it used to be. But these are still lessons you need to learn. These are character traits that you still need to have in your life. So, the 12 points of the Scout Law, let's dive into those.
Let's get into it.
A lot of times we think about Boy Scout troops, or people think about Boy Scout troops, and it's, hey, we've got a dozen guys in the basement of some old church, and, one or two men that are kind of doing it because no one else will. But that's not the picture of Troop 80. Eric, do you mentioned Jack Bryant. Was he the first Scoutmaster? I mean, how did this troop start, and how was there such an energy of men that were committed to making this thing grow? Because it was totally different. I don't know of any other troop that is like it. I mean, there probably is, but what is the genesis of all that, and what kept it going?
Part of it, I don't know it started in 1955. Jack Bryant was technically the second Scoutmaster of Troop 80.
Okay.
There was some guy, I have his name somewhere in the archives. He started out as Scoutmaster. They were headquartered in Avondale Baptist Church, and the church agreed to sponsor him. And Jack Bryant would tell the story that they had to negotiate how many weekends they could go out because the preacher didn't want the troop, engaging in activities that kept them out of church, which was kind of an interesting start. And then they went to the Elks Lodge as the sponsor, and and when I joined the troop, that's who was sponsoring Troop 80. And then we were able, 2 years later, I came in 65, 2 years later, 67, we built the building that's there today. And we became autonomous, and much to the chagrin of the council. Right now, when Jack Bryant became Scoutmaster, he literally followed the rule book. Back then, adults could get Eagle Scout. Ted got his Eagle Scout that way, and so did
I
Jack
didn't
Bryant.
know that.
Yeah, both of them they're true Eagles, but you could still earn your Eagle as an adult.
So they led by example. Example.
And Jack just, I'm not sure that he was, like I said, he was a great theoretician so much as he said, I think we can do this. And actually it sounded like fun. And I know there was tons of hard work. But at the same time, I think people stayed because they enjoyed it at one level. And it had the very positive side effect of shaping young men, which I think was part of the BSA thrust. I'm not sure that they intended the troop the size of Troop 80, but my view was our worldview was correct. And we were pushing those kids in the way we ought to push them. And Jack would take, and a lot of these, Jack would talk to me. We were pretty close. I know he was close to Rodney, and but that he would stretch. He said the physical purpose of the program. Now, this was not the virtue instilling, but the physical purpose was to stretch the kid. What he meant by that was it's like what Tony described. You get into a situation, you're in a little bit over your head, you think, but you're really not. And part of it is I always took the view that a scout was not trained until you could drop him off at the northeast corner of Coetus Creek campsite by himself in the snow, and he would get to camp alive, right?
Yeah. And get there on time.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
We had a schedule. It's interesting because I was in a very unique position. I was a senior in high school. I was obviously playing varsity football, track, and I was the senior patrol leader.
And that's when I came into the troop, Rodney, when you were SPL.
Yeah, and it was very unique because Jack was Scoutmaster, but he was having to pull out due to illness. So I was actually there at summer camp, running summer camp, and Jack was not there. It was during the part where he started to become ill and started to pull out. So it was very interesting. We had a very close relationship, as with every senior patrol leader that up until that point that had Jack as their Scoutmaster. He had such a unique ability to pull different people together from different backgrounds and make it a cohesive working unit, not only with the men, but as Eric had pointed out, with the boys as well. There was definitely someone there as an adult leader who could mentor any youth coming into that program, from individuals who were mechanics, from individuals who were salespeople, engineers. He just had this unique ability about pulling everyone together, and plus he also impacted me in my religion. I loved what he always said. We're going to have on Sunday mornings a non-denominational Baptist service. And that's exactly what we did. And we still sing those songs today. Every time I hear them at my church that I pastor at, Heaven Came Down and Because He Lives, it immediately takes me back to Sunday mornings there on camp out, singing those songs every single month that we went camping.
Right.
But yeah, he was such a tremendous man. And I spent a lot of time at his house. And, he really did the one-on-one mentoring with the senior patrol leaders and really helped develop them into young men. And that's something that I always look back on and just, he brings me such joy. Eric had mentioned 2 men in his life. I actually had 4 men. My father died when I was 14 years old, going into the 9th grade. And there were really 4 men that really helped shape me. Walter Wolfram, which is Eric's father. Mm-hmm. Jack Bryant, of course. Ted Abrahamson was the other one. And the other one was Tom Roller, who was active in the troop for quite some time and had been an Eagle Scout before Eric, and had come back in and helped. And without those type of leaders coming in, I wouldn't be where I am today. And their influence and just the way that they crafted you as a young man.
Rodney, you say something that crafted you as a young man, and there's this line, and I don't know the genesis of it, and it almost feels kind of apocryphal, but I know it's a part of the 80 lore. Was this conversation, as I understood it, was between Jack and Ted, looking at new scouts coming in, and the statement goes, "There's not much, but that's all we got to make a man out of."
It sounds like a drill sergeant for the Marine Corps.
Yeah, there's not much there. Yeah.
Jack was not much into patting you on the shoulder and, quote, affirming you. He was, if you make it live tonight at sunset, that's great. But
well, there's got to be that balance, and you can have tyranny on the other hand, and you can have passivity on the other hand. And it's I'm drawn back to our first episode of The Man Identity, and I referenced Andrew Tate, this British guy, kickboxer, and he's got these troves of young men following behind him. He's a jerk. He's an idiot. He's terrible. But the young men are following him. Why? Because he's one of the few voices today that looks him in the eyeball and says, even though he's doing it for wrong motives, but he looks him in the eyeball and he says, "Stand up. You can do this." And that's what we need to hear more of that, but we need to hear it from a godly standpoint. You can do this. You are a man. God made you a man. You can do this. And yeah. I think even though Jack was harsh, I think there was a lot of that in the experience that we had, that this is tough, but you can do this. You can do this.
And he always made us feel at the end of the day that we did our best. And if he didn't, he would sit there and tell you that, that you need to do this or you need to do that. But he made it where boys could be leaders at the scout troop. And he taught you how to be a leader along with the other men.
Yeah. Assistant patrol leader, assistant senior patrol leader. And then even little things. You may not have a position, but hey, here's a task. Go grab some guys, go do this. So you get a little bit of leadership. Well, here's what I want to do. And I read them before we got on together, the 12 points of the Scout Law. And when you come into scouting to get your first rank, tenderfoot, you have to learn the Scout Oath and you have to learn the Scout Law. And it's funny, I still know that. I don't want to quote it now because we're recording, and when you do something online, you just forget. But those 12 points, and I'm thinking about those as these are character references that you're not going to find playing video games. You're not going to find these in Hollywood. You're not going to find these, well, some of these, but not all of these in the public school system. But the 12 points of the Scout Law, and it starts out with the scout is trustworthy. So here's what I'd like us to do: kind of have a round table, and I'd like you guys to take one of those points, the Scout Law, and just for a minute, what is the point, and then what does that mean? Especially, what would that mean for a young man today? Eric, you're we are respecting our elders here. Eric, you're the old man. Take it away. What do we got with the first point of the Scout Law?
Well, that's frightening, though true. One of the things about the Scout Law, to start with trustworthy, is, and this is a little bit different than when I went through as a Scoutmaster. When I went through, you had the cultural forces that were actually best evidenced in the Norman Rockwell posters.
Yes.
I always viewed what we were doing that Norman Rockwell had captured it, and that I think was even unique against England. I think scouting in America, the effort to shape young men, and Rockwell was not trying to shape young men; he was recording young men who had been shaped by scouting. Right, yeah. And those posters, ironically, the troop had a copy of the poster called the Scoutmaster that sat there on the right-hand side as you came in. Troop 80, while we were there, never changed. So you could come back 20 years later and everything looked the same. But the Scoutmaster, that impacted me as a Scoutmaster. I viewed in part myself that way. And I think Jack did too. Now, trustworthiness, ultimately, you're talking about, is God trustworthy? Are his promises secure? I would reinterpret not in a blending of religion and scouts, not at all. But the emphasis of trustworthy is valid because it's underpinned by a religious virtue, and that virtue is a reflection of God's trustworthiness. Today, for a young man coming out today, his background is in flux. He may or may not have parents there. I don't do family law anymore, but the people who still practice it talk about incredible bitterness now across the board. And so young man is exposed to competing elements. Nobody's trustworthy with respect to him. That is, who does he look to?
Who does he trust?
Yeah. And so, and also, without getting too sociological, Scouts has been under attack a long time, but you go back even in the academy to World War I, you started seeing a systematic academic undermining of the family, and they got there. The academics who wanted it have achieved it. And so now, and even scouting's been undermined. But anyway, for a young man today, if you have access to them, then the idea of trustworthiness is going to be a new concept to them. And, and I'll stop here after this anecdote. I've noticed on TV and movies, the good guys routinely lie.
Yeah.
And are rewarded for it. And they don't have to. You look at the plot line, they can tell the truth. They can stand up and be a man in the old sense. But now youth are given the example of somebody who just lies as a matter of course.
I love what you said, Eric, a two-pronged attack. A, who can we trust? And we find that trust in Jesus Christ, that God keeps his word. Jesus died on the cross. He rose again, like you said, and he will return. So we can trust God, but then flipping that around, that I want to become a man that people can say, hey, you can take Steve at his word. You can take Eric, you can take Tony, you could take these guys at their word because they're trustworthy.
It's a little bit negative. My view of loyalty, when you walked in that front door and they put a black hat on your head, the mafia would flip out because we were more loyal than the mafia. And now Jack Bryant used to tell everybody, oh, we're all just good little Boy Scouts and we're all on the same team. And I never believed it. And I was right. Jack, beneath that surface. Now I was on the surface. My view was, if you're not Troop 80, I'm not even going to talk to you. But loyalty, the only loyalty, like that bad guy you're talking about, that martial law, he is calling for a form of loyalty which is very negative. And
occultic type loyalty.
Yeah.
And
that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about that.
I know that, but I'm just saying that's what you're fighting against. There's an interesting passage to me in Proverbs 1 where it warns somebody. He says, when the wicked come to you and say, let's go do something bad, all right, don't do that. That's a negative loyalty, because the wicked come and say, hey, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. I want you to be my right-hand man. The problem with loyalty in our culture today is you have to come over two hurdles. You need to be loyal, but it's who you're going to be loyal to.
There you are. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and who you're loyal to dictates who you're not loyal to. Tony.
So, guys, I took a slightly different tact on this, but I've been thinking about this meeting and trying to figure out how do I take these points of the Scout Law and root them. Where do I root them? And I don't have to stretch it too far, but with almost every one of them, I can take some tie back to the Ten Commandments. I can see how there's some underpinnings there that help us to understand that. And some of them are a little bit of a stretch. But when we talk about helpful and this idea, how are we caring for others? How are we treating respect and obedience and caring for the people that God places in our life? And I go back to, well, maybe just where I am with my personal situation with my parents. How do I honor my mother and father in a time that is requiring a whole lot of extra things out of me that I, haven't been required as a son thus far in my life. So in some ways, I think this idea of being helpful, how am I going to bless the people that God has blessed my life with, no matter what they're going through right now? So I don't know if that lines up fair.
Yeah, we live in a world where everybody is thinking, what am I going to get out of this? What am I going to get out of my marriage, my church, my job, my community? And this is being intentional to want to practically help someone else in their need.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, when Baden Powell came up with the Scout Law, he actually had 9 points. Add to it. He had trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, cheerful, and thrifty. And when it came over here to America, they ended up adding more to that list. And I think it's all inclusive, probably, of, as we've talked about here, the impact of Christianity on scouting. Yeah. And even though there has been a cultural shift in scouting, I think what for us that we grew up with was very unique. And it was a true moral code to live by your Christian faith. If, people who are non-Christians can look at the Scout Law and yes, they can see the value of it. But for us as Christians, I think it holds more true to Tony's point about looking at, for instance, like the Ten Commandments. The 4 that I was going to focus on, courteous, kind, obedient, and cheerful. If you take just those 4 right there, and you look at the fruit of the Spirit, see, hey, the fruit of the Spirit is involved in every one, certainly all of the passages, except for thrifty. That's more of your economic kind of background. But if you look at that courteous and kind, obedient, well, in the book of Galatians, chapter 5, Paul tells us that, what's the number one law that Jesus put out there? It's to love your neighbor as yourself. And of course, he's quoting from Leviticus. So he's quoting something from the Old Testament in the New Testament, and it relates to what Jesus said there in John 13, that we are to love others as I have loved you. By this, all will know that you are my disciples. So if we're carrying out these 12 points, and it's funny because I still have them memorized. I was a scoutmaster here in Jackson, Mississippi. And when my 4th son got his Eagle, I had actually been a registered scout for 50 years.
Oh, wow.
And I know Eric was in that same situation, getting his boys through, and then his great leadership at Troop 80 and the impact that it's had for all of us. But, these 12 points really encompass our moral character. To me, it's my compass. It points me north. And that's how I look at these 12 points, is the significance in my life and how they still play an important part. People say, well, you were an Eagle Scout. And I said, no, I am one. And I still am. So,
yeah. Tony, what about number 4?
Friendly was a little bit of a stretch for me, but I found that in this appreciation of life, when the commandment says you shall not murder, it basically, we're called to value the integrity of this gift of life. And so when I care for other folks, when I am someone that they want to be around, I'm honoring the life that God has given them by bringing my life into them. I want to be a blessing in that way, to affirm not only the value of life, but I want to treat others with dignity. I want to show kindness in the midst of that. And that's where I landed on that one. So
Okay.
I'm going to tell you, there were times growing up in the troop, friendly wasn't always the easiest thing to do, because we all had scouts in our patrols or that we had to deal with in the troop. And I'm not going to name any names, but sometimes I failed at this.
There were some fights periodically.
Yeah, there was. And, one of my favorite characters, we all know David Worthing, and just a psychologist, and can be very scary with some of the stories he would share. But Midnight Canyon, I got Tony and Will. I go with his group, and we've got David. We're off camping. Remember, we had to go on that 2-day little camp outside.
Right.
He starts telling stories from Vietnam.
Yes, he did.
And we're all just sitting there horrified of hearing stories of all the things that he had. But, it was just that kind of impact. He was, we always had a good time. And it's funny because I actually got to be a scoutmaster for Troop 80 at summer camp for 4 years in a row while I was off of college. They gave me back and said, hey, we need you to be Marshall Cutright can't come and be a scoutmaster anymore. So I got to be scoutmaster. And it was one of the McCollum boys. I won't mention Browning by name, but it was Browning. I talk about someone who tested your nerves, and he's grown up to be a great young man. But it's funny because when I look at you, Steve, or you, Tony, I look at you as like, oh, okay, they're still 17, 14, 15 years old. And I don't realize that, hey, these guys have grown up. And I know Eric looks at me like a doofus because he had to correct me a lot. So, but it was a great time.
That's okay. Eric still corrects me. So,
yeah.
Rodney, what do you got for number 5, courteous?
Well, courteous is about being polite. That's the bottom line. And it's about being polite to all. And so from a Christian perspective, we have to be, compassionate to all people. We have to be helpful. And even those that are the untouchable and the unlovable. And that's what, to me, when I think about courteous, what we need to be in our lives.
People that we may not agree with politically, or people who think of God differently, or social, political, or whatever, just treating everybody with dignity, whether or not they're our best buds or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and to that, it really rolls in. If you're going to be courteous, and to Tony's point about, Scott is friendly, what about kind? What does that mean to be kind? And it's really
number 6. Yeah.
Just to treat others the way that you want to be treated. That's what it is. And that's what it's about. Those core values that you want to treat all people with respect. But so he mentions it. You got to be kind. You got to be kind to folks.
Okay, Rodney, you've got 3 in a row.
I've got obedient, and you follow the rules. And Eric made some points. Jack Bryant followed the rule book. Eric, when he was scoutmaster, whether he thinks it or not, he followed the rule book. Walter wrote a wonderful book on how to actually run a troop, and here are the activities that you do. It was follow the rule book. We have the scouting handbook, and I've got a scouting handbook from the 40s. I've got a scouting handbook from the 50s, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then, of course, when I have 4 sons that went through, and the book is consistent from the earliest book that I have from scouting all the way through. And again, it's about being obedient, not just to scouting, but to your family, to your school, to your elders, your community. A scout obeys, and he also does things in order. There's a consistent pattern there to your life.
I think about the troop, and even as you ran the troop, there were rules that you followed in the troop. Like, you didn't show up on Tuesday night in anything less than a full uniform. Or you stood in line behind the broom.
You show up in tennis shoes. You go up to the front for a reunion with the bristles on the broom. And that was the one that we all fought. Why can't we wear tennis shoes? But you know what? It set a standard, and that standard is, if you're going to wear the uniform, you're going to wear, number one, as Tony says, the complete uniform, and you're going to do it with pride.
I like that, with pride. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of. So scouting was originally started in England. I don't know. I just have the feel of, a knight being obedient to his king. I think about some of the great British generals and admirals who stood. They stood up and they followed the king, and it's that idea. And ultimately, we want to follow Jesus Christ as our king. There's freedom. We're granted freedom. There are places for freedom, but there comes a moment in time where we have to say, okay, I'm not the boss in this situation. and I'm going to be obedient to my leader.
Mm-hmm.
Rodney, you got one more, cheerful. And it's interesting that comes after obedience, because we're not cheerful when we have to be obedient.
You always have to look at the bright side of life when you think about cheerful. It reminds me, we had a guy in the troop named Ridgway. Eric probably knows who I'm talking about. And I'm still mad at Eric for doing this. When we grew up in the troop, we had white shirts with red collars. He changed them to gray. And I know why he changed them to gray. We're on our trip to Yellowstone. Eric was on the trip, and he wasn't Scoutmaster yet, but he was on that trip. And we had a guy named Ridgway on there. And Jack said, we're going to stop and get some cherries. And he said, Rodney, I want you to go back because this guy is a pigsty. He literally was. He could not stay clean. And so we went back and we got a garbage bag, put it over his head, cut a hole in it, put it down, got his red poplin jacket, zipped it all the way to the top. Now, Brent, eat your cherries. And we get to where we're going. There's no cherry juice on the red poplin jacket. You couldn't see it. We pulled the plastic garbage bag off, and his white shirt was stained with red juice everywhere. It's like, how can you do that? But we still had to look at the bright side. You still had to be cheerful, and you had to make people happy. That's part of that deal. But I always remember that it just put a laugh on me. Like, how could you have done that? I don't know.
that was before probably we discovered the science of ADHD.
Yeah, I think that was that may have been a 1977 trip.
Wow,
wow. It was maybe 78. I can't remember. Eric would.
No, 76. Yellowstone. 76, yeah, it was. That was our second Yellowstone trip. In fact, Jack said I was working for Ted during the summer. I was on the idiot stick on a surveying crew. I got the whole. That was my high tech job.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Jack says, I want you to go to Yellowstone, and I said I don't have the money. He said, oh, I'll pay your way. So I said, all right, free trip to Yellowstone. He said, oh, by the way, Eric, you're going to take over Squad A for Yellowstone trip. And I said, Jack, those are a bunch of screwballs.
And guess who was in Squad A?
I know. And he goes, I know. So if you want a free trip to Yellowstone, then you're to take those guys and to try to do something with them. And I can't remember the patrol names, but I had 2 patrols there. So I remember the first time we fell in, you guys were everywhere. I couldn't even find you. I mean, they were wandering around. So we were up there in Cheyenne, and I got them over we were in the natatorium, that swimming pool, and they were up in the bleachers, and the 2 patrols were sitting there. And I'm let's see, I was big, 22 years old. And I said, you guys embarrass me again, I'm going to kill you. And I said, when we fall in, you better already be there. I said, he said, if Jack has blown that whistle, you better be in line already. And I made him do push-ups just until I ran out of adrenaline. And by the end of the trip, though, they were first in line. But yeah, cheerful. Thanks a lot, Jack. He thought he was entertained. He was smiling.
Yeah.
Gosh, well, one of you guys
flashbacks.
One of you guys mentioned thrifty. Thrifty is number 9. Tony, all's in your court.
Yeah, you guys gave me the fun ones. Thanks. But I was thinking about this, and when I think about thrifty, I've got to look at everything that I have been taught. I had to be thrifty with my scouting supplies. I had to be thrifty with what my mom and dad worked hard to give me. And what I discovered was that I was always looking at the older scouts. It's like, man, that JanSport backpack is incredible. I had to learn. I can't just covet that. I can't desire that. But it was one of those things that I began to value what I had, and I began to look for, okay, how can I improve my lot in life by preparing for my future. So it was I'm not grasping for what everybody else had, but I am honoring what was sacrificed to let me be a part of the scout troop when I was getting started.
You lived that out with you and your brothers on that grass mowing.
Yeah,
that's how I remember you came by when I was living over there on Goodnight Street. Y'all all came and mowed my yard once a week, and y'all were saving money for college, and Now, and I'm going to butt in here on one thing on thrifty, that if a young man is facing this issue, he's not alone. This whole culture is in trouble. And that is, it's instant gratification.
Yes.
With debt. And we rack up huge amounts of debt, are unable to defer gratification. And you go to, and this is a deal where if you say that you're talking to a 15-year-old and you're trying to convince them to, show self-restraint, they're going to say, well, my parents don't, my uncles and aunts don't, nobody does. And every year, the federal government announces how many new trillions of dollars that we've added to the debt. Right. And there's subtle TV commercials. I don't study this stuff. It's just stuff that bugs me. There's a commercial that's running right now. This kid's just walking down the street, and he's got some app. It's a shopping app. So he walks up, and here's a really cool bomber jacket. I mean, this looks pretty neat. He clicks, then the scene cuts, and he's got the jacket on. Yeah. Then he goes down about 5 seconds later, and there's some kicks, some $250 tennis shoes. He goes click, and it's on his feet. You've got an 11-year-old kid with an app on his phone who is charging hundreds of dollars, and everybody's going, this is a good deal. Yeah. And so if you're trying
those commercials don't show you what happens when the bill comes due.
That's right.
But it undermines the presupposition of the Bible is that you will show self-restraint. Ephesians says something kind of interesting, contrary to the American culture. It says that you should earn money so that you can give it away to the poor. Mm-hmm. It's not just feed your family. You earn money to give it away, which is that's something you don't see on TV today.
John Wesley's admonition to the Methodists was earn all you can, save all you can, so that you can give away all that you can.
There you go. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I didn't think that thrifty would be a big point, but I'm glad we thought about it. But talking to so many young men, there's part of it, and I recognize that. Thinking about your stories, looking up at the older guys who had the nice big Jan Sports with the frame backpacks, and I've got the Kmart special. So part of this we don't want to envy, but part of it is, okay, if that's something I want, what is the goal I need to set to get there instead of instant gratification? But then also realizing that, being honest with what I've got, but then the spiritual dimension of, I'm building for the bigger picture of eternity, not just instant gratification of now. So being thrifty, that a real man's going to control the money, not allow the temptation for more money to control him.
Well, I'll give you a good story about thrifty. My job growing up, I was a paper boy. You have to look on the History Channel to see what that is, because they don't have it anymore. But I delivered papers from age 13 all the way to I graduated high school. And I saved up my money when I was a junior. It took me about 7 months. And I went down to Lubbock, where my sister was living. And they had a place down there called the Sport Haus. And they sold North Face products. And I bought a North Face tent. Eric has been in that tent. We've used that on several winter campouts and stuff. It's that tent. I bought it in 1978, and it took me about 7 to 8 months to save up money for it. And I used it. Last time I went camping was 4 years ago, when my son finished his Eagle. I was still using the same tent.
Wow.
And
I remember that tent.
You buy the tent and you buy good gear, and you make it last. And that, to me, when I think about thrifty, I think about that tent. I still have it. It still is usable. And but that's when I think about Scout. If I had to save up my money, and my mom was like, "Are you sure you want to do that? You sure you want to spend your money on this tent?" I said, "Yeah, that's the tent I want." And I used it for over 50 years.
Wow, that's an incredible story. Eric, let's move back to you. Brave number 10.
When we all were growing up, if you wanted to know what brave meant, you just watched John Wayne. And I saw an interesting deal on like Netflix. It was kind of describing what John Wayne's career meant. He was always characterized as, pilgrim, and, he was always characterized as brave. That was intentional. He was actually selling, in his own mind, a version of America. He wasn't just making movies. He was portraying that. And it really bothered him when the anti-Western came in, like the Wild Bunch. was the good guys were the bad guys were the good guys. Anyway, but of course, one of the virtues he espoused was bravery, even in the face of impossible odds. I think part of this is, what's brave is contextual to an extent. And that is, you have to stand where you stand. You don't know. Sometimes you just don't know where it's coming from, where the test comes from. And I think, I think the bravery, when you're trying to tell a 12-year-old, how do you be brave? You have to unhook what Steve was talking about. You've got to unhook this idea that you go out and beat somebody up. That's not bravery. But it is standing firm for the truth, standing in favor of somebody. Maybe they're, and every one of us probably has stories where we should have intervened. That is, the bully was picking on some kid who was, the kid was probably a weirdo, but we all we had to do was step in and say, chill out, knock it off.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I have, that's an area of bravery. And, or you stand up for a Christian position, and you don't, not as a jerk, but you advocate a Christian position, you're going to get blowback. That's an issue of bravery. And I think it kind of, I'm not sure it isolates itself. I think you have to, your bravery is measured in context of your other virtues.
Standing up to do what's right, regardless of the consequences.
Yep.
Yeah. Now there's a catch. All right. Go back to theology. Romans 12, it says, as much as it lies within you, get along with all people. All right. Mm-hmm. You go back and under that, what that is talking about is not a situation you create yourself. It's talking about a situation in which you find yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not going out and looking for a fight. That's right.
That's right. And I think sometimes the church these days, because the country is so polarized, I mean, we can't say hello without, drawing guns. I think that gets lost. And the ability of the church to stand for Christ, but also peace, love, joy, the fruit of the Spirit at the front. And quite frankly, I think if that's done, it's rejected. Or manipulated. And so bravery in that sense, I think in today's culture could be very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. We're almost done. We got two more. Number 11, clean. Tony, that's you.
So I was thinking about this, and I came down two different roads and with this. And the first one was how there was this sense, even on a camp, how do we present ourselves well, and that took on a new meaning when you're cleaning up on about day 3 of the hike over Columbine Pass, and you're bathing in snowmelt. You got to want to be clean to do that. And I remember just thinking I was going to die there. But you carry this really ultimately where it goes is this idea that clean living means some purity of speech and action, that I'm respecting the holiness of God. And I think that was something that was profoundly taught in the troop was, okay, you're going to live a life that's going to make a difference. And you can't look like the world around you if you're going to live a clean life that will impact those around you.
Mm. Number 12, Eric.
When I would do Scoutmaster's Minutes, I was thinking about this. I would talk about trustworthiness, and the take was if you weren't trustworthy, nothing else counted. And then I would talk about every 3 years about kindness, which tells you something about me. And then y'all wouldn't have believed it. If I got up and said everybody needs to be kind, everybody was. So, but the deal on reverence, brave, clean, and reverent, I think, especially for the Christians, even, aside from the issue of the Baptist camp, the Baptist church service, a reverence towards God, this was a reflection of cultural Christianity, but nonetheless, it's correct. Mm-hmm. in the sense that theologically, we are commanded to be holy because he is holy, mm-hmm. and to hold in regard the things of God that he says he demands that we reverence. And I think that because of the background of Troop 80, I didn't have to ever pull punches on that. I could just talk about that because it's in the Scout law, and it's kind of and the Christian view of the world and God is one that demands reverence, expects reverence, and that we could talk to this, and I could talk to the Scouts about that. I think at that level. Now today, and now here's going to. A hypothetical 12-year-old boy today You want to talk to him about being reverent. He has no concept what that word means. He has no context. It's like my dad used to say. I said I would respond to you, but I'd have to educate you for 2 hours before I could insult you. And so your problem is you're talking about this kid about being reverent. You have to go in and plug stuff into his cultural background that is not there.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know what you see or Tony about in your congregations these days, but I look out there and the family is under such attack that you no longer see portrayed a man, a wife, and 2 kids. You just don't see that. You just see all different kinds of things are called families.
Yeah.
Well, without that background, how do you in the abstract talk about reverence to some kid who has no background?
Yeah. No clue.
Yeah. And that's a deal where, and I've thought about this in other areas, like in the school systems, and part of it is that I try to think through something and then the culture just changes again. But this, when you start focusing on reverence, how are you going to make that work? It's almost down to strong preaching and an altar call. I mean, it's almost to the point where you don't have enough time to plug in to the background. If somebody says you got 15 minutes with this kid, that's all you're ever going to get. I think that reverence is going to be very difficult.
Yeah.
I think the angle that I would take it is when you're starting from nowhere is, okay, there's this idea of God, and here's what I want you to understand. You need to take this seriously. If nothing else, that might be a place to at least set the stage that this is a big deal. I'm working through the 10 Commandments here at church, and we're looking at, not to misuse the name of the Lord. And it's kind of this idea of the way we talk about God reflects the way we think about God. So, okay, so man, if you had a young guy before you, 15 to 25, young man, and you had just one opportunity to say one thing to that man, what piece of advice would you get? Eric, again, you're the old guy. You go first, Rodney, and then Tony.
Well, this sounds churchy, but I thought about that question coming, and I think you seek the face of the Lord. Now that would have to be unpacked. But if you've got limited time with a young man, you have to point him to Christ and trust that the Holy Spirit will touch his heart.
Yeah. I would have to say, what are you living for?
I would take what Eric said, and I would push it another step further. Then I would say, who are you surrounding yourself with that can point you to Christ? I was blessed by the men of Troop 80. They were instrumental in me becoming who I am, and who's in your corner to point you in that direction. Okay.
I want to conclude with this. I did not realize that we would talk this much about a guy named Jack Bryant, who was a scoutmaster when I entered the troop, and then Eric took over later on. But Jack would say quite often, don't wait to be a great man, be a great boy. And sometimes, and I'm talking to our audience, guys out there, sometimes you're thinking, when I graduate boot camp, or when I graduate college, or I get married, or I get this job, then I would say, don't worry about that. The things that you need to do, build those into your life today, even with God. When I get my life figured out, no. You give your life to God today. Don't wait until be a great man today. So men, thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, we enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Matthias, time is a factor here. We just did not have enough time to cover everything. And I think about my own story. It's been interesting to think about my own life, that there have been times when things just get really tough, whether it's work or just whatever's going on. And I'm reminded, and we talked about the Scout Law, but I'm reminded of the Scout Oath, which I launched in the Hard Start. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and the country. And I remember memorizing that as an 11-year-old. And there's still times it's like, man, this really stinks, but I'm going to do my duty. I'm going to do my duty. And having that imprinted in my psyche just really encourages me to keep going. One of the questions that I asked the guys before we went into the 12 points of the Scout Law, was one of the things that they might have learned, big lessons from Troop 80. And I made the observation, there are a lot of things, but I think the biggest thing for me, Matthias, is just feeling like I can do something. Even though I may not know specifically how to do it, there's a sense of, okay, I think I can figure this out. And that came from and comes from by being with other men, being with other boys, rubbing off on each other, figuring promises out. So even today, here I am at 56, and every now and then when, man, this just stinks, I remember Bible verses all the time, but I remember the Scout oath, on my honor, I will do my duty to God and my country. And that's that idea. And I like when Baden-Powell talked about, reviving this idea of a knight, that I'm going to do what I'm called to do. Yeah. So we went through the 12 points. Matthias, were there any of those that stuck out to you more than anything else?
Well, I want to kind of go back to what you were talking about, the duty. I think that's what a lot of people are missing, is a sense of duty, a sense of purpose. And even if you don't know what you're doing in life, if you go through the day and you're like, this is tough, what is all this for? If you have it in your psyche that this is my duties to do this for God and my country, you wake up with a sense of purpose almost. You know what I mean? And it kind of gives you that drive to get through those tough times. But also, going back, you said, going back, you were talking about, it being around those men when you got to, even if you don't know something, you have the confidence to know, I can figure this out. Let me figure out how do I handle this? How do I build this? How do I, do this? And, I think that's something that a lot of men are missing now too. I was blessed enough to grow up with a manly man type guy, stepdad. I hated this growing up as a kid, but now I tell my kids this too. Whenever I would say I can't, he said, I don't want to hear you say you can't.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And I hated that as a kid. I just wanted to be able to say, I can't do this, and then not do it, right? But it's really transferred to me, and it's obviously stuck with me, because all the time now I'm like, I can't say I can't do it. I'm going to, especially being a dad, taking care of a home, it's almost like I'm like, okay, I can't do this. It's okay, how do I fix this? How do I approach this? How do I work on this? Because I've built that confidence through those trials where I said I can't, and he said, don't say that. I have the confidence, I'm going to figure this out. I can figure this out.
Well, and part of that comes from your stepfather. I think you said he was a Marine. Yeah. I'm thinking about the context in Boy Scouting. I remember in particular, we were up in New Mexico, and this was a summer camp, and we had to backpack into the place. And I don't remember how far the initial hike was. Maybe it was a 10-mile hike, 5. I don't remember what it was, but I'm an assistant senior patrol leader, so I'm kind of moving around with the boys. And one of my buddies and I, Randy and I, we were in the middle of the line, and there's this one kid. We were about 3/4 of the way through, and the kid was just exhausted. And he said, I'm tired. And he threw down his pack and he goes, I'm going to call my mom. And my buddy Randy looked at him and said, okay, yeah, where are you going to call her at? And it's like, oh,
yeah,
I'm in the middle of the wilderness.
Yeah.
I can't do that. I guess I need to put my pack on and push through. And I guarantee when it was all said and done, it was, I did that. I did that. Yeah. And sometimes we need to press into those tough times, knowing at the end, we're going to come out of that with more confidence.
Right. Yeah, I think that's good. Lastly, I want to kind of say, talking about the knight as being the knights, like the knights of old, man, I don't know if it's just something in men or boys, but it's like, I always wanted to be some kind of hero in some way, somebody's knight in shining armor, you know what I mean? So I just think that's imprinted in men to just want those principles, that bravery, that, all the 12, kind of, I don't know, pillars is the right word, that Boy Scouts upholds.
Yeah, the 12 points of the Scout Law.
Yeah,
the Scout is this. The Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent, so I can still do it.
There you go. Got the full list memorized.
Well, Matthias, out of those points, were there one or two that really struck you, or maybe something that Tony or Rodney or Eric had to say in giving commentary on those points?
Yeah, I can't remember which four, but it was. I think a lot of them embody like the fruits of the Spirit. I think that's something that I really thought of throughout this, and it's like as a young man, I'm still a young man, but as a younger man, I thought I embodied the fruits of the Spirit pretty good. And like I've said before in other interviews, that I got married and realized I was very humbled very quickly that I do not exude those early on. In life, facing those trials, it builds that character. And I think I did get a lot of character building in my childhood, but but I think there's a lot of areas where I didn't, So all that to kind of say is it's just funny how all of this roots back into Christ. And I know that the founder was a Christian. And another one that really stuck out to me was bravery. And not for anything in particular, but the fact that I can't remember which man was talking, but he talked about, we can all think of one point in our lives where we should have stood up, we should have said something, not being mean or rude or punching somebody in the face, but, if somebody's picking on a kid, hey, chill out, And I think there's a lot of points, and I think, like he said, in every man's life, you can think of one time when you're like, man, I should have stood up, I should have said something, because we all think before, like, oh, I can be brave, I'll punch anybody in the face, I'll get in a fight, whatever. Then a moment comes and you don't have that bravery like you thought you did, and then you might not even realize it until the moment's over. You're like, man, I wish I would have handled that.
Yeah, and it's a combination of all these together that I'm going to be brave, but I'm going to do it in a kind way. And, thinking about a Christian man, I want to stand for truth, but I don't want to be the term that I like to use. I don't want to be a jerk for Jesus about it. And
right.
And part of the discussion that the guys had, it's not as though that I go looking for problems. It's not that I go look to pick a fight.
Right.
But if I'm just going to live out of my character, if I'm going to live out of my God-given identity, if I'm going to live where Jesus really is king of my life, those problems are just going to come.
Right. You're going to find yourself in those situations.
Yeah.
Like you said.
Yeah. What else?
The last one, reverent.
Reverent.
I'd like to actually give a hopeful take on this.
Okay.
So, I do know, I think it's a general statement. Yes. I think, this generation of kids, you don't see as much reverence for the father. But I think that also goes back to fathers it's all just a big web of culture affecting how dads are and affecting the children. And it's this big cascading thing. But I would like to offer actually some hope in this regard. And because I've worked with, in my job, I've worked with younger kids. I worked with a 13-year-old, a 16-year-old. And then at our church, I've taught the youth on some Sunday mornings. I was involved with the youth group for a while. And man, all the kids that are in there, I look back to when I was in youth group, and I was a pretender. I was not a Christian teenager at all. But these kids that I see, they live out a godly life, and they respect their parents. And I look back into the kids that I was in youth group with, and I'm like, none of the kids I was with were like this. We all had these secret double lives. We had our youth group life and then our sinful teenage life, and we put on this front when we come to youth group, or maybe not even, but I know that each and every one of those kids there is very genuine, very authentic, and has a love for Jesus like I didn't see in my generation. And then, yes, there was one kid that I worked with that, like I said, culture I think has affected the way that his dad was, and he had absolutely no respect. But then I had this other one, a 16-year-old kid who was very respectful. It threw me off because the first time I met him, he called me sir all the time.
Okay.
And I was, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, you don't have to call me sir. And I never said that, but I was thinking, I'm like, man, this kid, it just threw me off because he just had so much respect for me, and I was just his personal trainer.
See, that would probably fit into this idea of courteous,
right?
That I'm going to say to older women, yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
I'm going to say to older men, yes, sir.
Yeah, and I drill into my kids all the time. Whenever if they do something or say something to their mom or to me, and I say, "What do you say?" "Yes, ma'am." "Yes, sir." "No, ma'am." "No, sir." Because that was drilled into me as a kid. I call people ma'am and sir all the time, and people that aren't from the South are like, "Don't call me that. That makes me feel old. Don't say that to me." And I'm like, "Well, I can't help it. It was drilled into my brain. Hold doors open and say yes, ma'am, and yes, sir." So I'm like, that's what I'm drilling into my kids. You got to say yes, ma'am, and yes, sir. But yeah, going back to him, it threw me off because I guess I just hadn't experienced that as an adult in my life yet. And so I just wanted to kind of offer some hope from that aspect. But yes, the reverence I think is a very big one. And you said something that was, how we talk about God is how we feel about him, right? Or you said something along those lines. Is kind of being reverent towards who he is in regards to who we are.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I remember preaching a sermon a few weeks ago. We're going through the 10 Commandments at church, and the commandment about not taking the name of the Lord in vain. And the idea was the way we talk about God reflects the way we think about God. And
there you go.
When we don't have a reverent attitude, and I would summarize it this way: a reverent attitude is God's big, I'm not.
Right. Yeah.
Therefore, I'm going to respect God. And Eric Wolfram talked about that. What does that mean today? And part of and if I were to make a challenge from this, part of the challenge would be is don't be a loafer. In other words, instead of relying upon what everybody else has to say about God, dive into the Bible yourself. Be a man. Let me encourage you. You're smart. You can figure this out. And just look at the word, start in the Gospel of John, or like we talked about a few weeks ago with Les Hardin, maybe Mark, if you're not reading the Bible yet. But it's being intentional. That I'm going to find out who this God is, and I'm going to be intentional about following this God. Not just a Sunday morning follower of Jesus, but it permeates every part of my life.
Every part of your life.
Yeah.
And when you truly understand the Lord, and in Proverbs says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And I think it goes back to what you were saying is, God is big, I'm not. And so I'm going to obey and listen and trust. And I think that's our job as men too. Is, when you're a father, they have to have this healthy level of fear and understand, like, that's my dad. He's big. I am not. I'm going to listen to him. Right. So I think it's kind of that, just being a dad has taught me so much about how I kind of need to look at the Lord.
Yeah.
And also taught me how much I need grace too. But I think that last one is actually a really big one. Yes, it starts with the dads. It starts with the men. And so I think that's why we're doing this, right? So we're doing this to help men to fill into that role that they need to be.
Yeah. And I think by way of challenge, I want to give a challenge to the older men, because I'm hoping that we have some older men listening to this as well. And going back to the discussion with Eric about Troop 80, again, one of the things that made Troop 80 so powerful, so distinct from other troops, is that there were a number of older men who were committed. It wasn't simply, I'll show up periodically, and if you can't find somebody else, but these were men who believed in discipling boys, and they were committed to it. So all that to say is, we live in a culture that's entitled, and a lot of times with older men, especially retired men, there's an idea of, well, I've done mine and now I'm going to kick back. So I would challenge the older men, just like those older men who built into me and built in to make Troop 80 what a powerful troop it was. Matter of fact, in the book that I wrote, Matthias, a few years ago, called Confessions, Finding Hope Through One Pastor's Doubt, I mentioned Troop 80 in chapter 2 of that. But there were so many men who were committed. So I would say challenge to older men, whatever environment you're in, look around, find some younger men, find some boys, and put your arm around them. Encourage them, ask them questions about school, ask them questions about their life, ask them questions, what can you pray about? Be willing to take time out of your schedule to show up at their games, to show up at their concerts, show up at whatever is meaningful to them, and be available to them. For the younger men, here's what I want to do. There are 12 points. Starting out today is trustworthy. A scout is trustworthy. Well, a real man is trustworthy. And it's simple. If you tell someone you're going to be at an appointment at 7 a.m, don't show up at 7:05. Do not. If you're going to show up not at 7, you show up at 6:50. Point being, if you say you're going to do something, do it. And that's from time all the way to the big contracts. If you make a big contract and you've signed your name, maybe it's not the best thing, but get it done, over with, and then move on and learn your lessons. So between now and the first Monday in January, that's 12 weeks through the first Monday in January. I just want to challenge you every Monday to take one of these points. You can look them up online. Scout is trustworthy. Scout is loyal. Next week, look at what loyal is. That I'm loyal to my family. I'm loyal to my country, because so many men in our world today are not. It's like whoever's going to give me the biggest paycheck, whoever's going to give me the greatest sex, whoever's going to give me the greatest whatever, that's what I'm doing. Where loyalty says, first I'm going to stake everything with Jesus. I'm going to stake everything with my wife, and I'm going to be dedicated. I'm going to be loyal, and then just working down through that. So that would be my challenge for us today.
I think that's a good one. And I just want to kind of touch on that last point before we end off here. The one you were talking about, if you say you're going to do something, do it. I think that's the one of the first things I learned about Scripture is why God hates lying, and it says in Proverbs, there's 7 things he hates. A lying tongue is one of them. It's because when God gives a promise and tells
God
us,
keeps his promise.
He keeps his promise, and he expects the same of men and humankind in general. If you say you're going to do something, you got to do it. Right. And I know we all fall short of that, but we need to make sure we really strive to, if we say we're going to do something, do it at all costs that we can. Yeah. So, yeah. So I think it was a pretty good episode today. I think it was a really good interview with those men. I learned a lot about Boy Scouts, or I guess what used to be of Boy Scouts.
Yeah, there are still some good troops out there. I was in Colorado several months ago, and there were about a dozen guys, actually from New York, who had driven all the way to Philmont, which is a scout ranch, the biggest scout ranch in New Mexico. But it is just not what it used to be, and it's just sad. And we did our country a disservice when we killed this program. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to man up, and we may not be scouts, we may not be Eagle Scouts, but we're going to be the men God created us to be in our own sphere of influence. We're going to be reverent. We're going to follow Jesus, and we're going to implement these things into our daily lives and just bless those who are around us today. So,
amen. All right, Steve. All right, audience.
Be strong.
Yes, be strong. All right. Thank you for tuning into The Man Identity. Make sure to tune in next week for the next episode. Make sure to like and subscribe this video if you're on YouTube. Thank you for listening on Apple Podcasts. Make sure to, I think, follow. I'm not too big on the audio platforms or knowings, but
download and share the podcast and things of that nature, and pray for Matthias so that he can get well.
Thank you. Yes, I do need it. All right. Thank y'all for tuning in. Y'all have a good one. Peace.